back with another spoiler-filled review. This time it's Terrifier 3. This review will contain spoilers possibly for the other two films as well. So if you haven't seen them, maybe watch them before listening to this. Okay, so I like Terrifier 1 a lot. It's a good basic slasher. Terrifier 2, I loved the atmosphere of that film. I think it fleshed the story out nicely. I liked all the supernatural elements. So I was very happy with that. And my expectations for this one were really high. I was hoping it would be good quality. It would build on all the violence and the lore and the story and all that stuff, but I found it very, very, very frustrating. Um, so, like I said, spoilers for pretty much the whole franchise here. What's the story of Terrifier 3? So, Art the Clown is killed at the end of Terrifier 2. The beginning of Terrifier 3 sees him resurrected, and then he goes into waiting for 5 years. Sort of sits in a chair and waits. Meanwhile, Sienna is in a mental hospital waiting to get released. That's what Art the Clown is waiting for. And then once she's been released, the two of them end up on a sort of meandering collision course for the rest of the film. Art the Clown chops his way through lots of random people on his way to Sienna. Sienna goes about her life. It shows how traumatized she is by the events of the previous film. And eventually it culminates in them clashing in a big battle at the end. So, nothing about this film was really, really bad. It's just that I found everything about it to be very middling. So, let me explain. The story, which I just described, I found to be quite middling. It's effective, it's good enough for a slasher. That's what you want in a slasher. You want a villain working his way to the final girl. But the whole film is just cutting back and forth and back and forth. You see Sienna for a bit, then you see Art kill someone, then Sienna doing some sort of nothing, and then cut back to Art again. The flashbacks with Sienna's father didn't really add that much to the story, so going back to her so many times didn't really add too much. Didn't really see that much of Jonathan either. So the structure of the film is quite frustrating. You want some tension, you want something, but it's just Art killing people who he's inevitably going to kill. None of them are going to survive, and every kill he does takes you closer to the end of the film, and therefore to him fighting against Sienna. So that's all it is. So given that if there was 90 minutes of that, it might be okay, but this is 2 hours of it. 2 hours. So the structure of the film wasn't too great. But what really matters with Terrifier is the violence. And despite many people saying the film made them feel quite queasy and it was extreme, other things like that, I thought it was tamer than the second Terrifier. I think it was a lot tamer. Well, not a lot tamer, but a bit tamer. There wasn't a kill scene on a par with the notorious alley bedroom death from the second one. And it's more than that. It's not just that there wasn't one big kill scene that topped what was in the second one. What it was that for some reason they kept cutting away from the violence instead of lingering on it in that sleazy kind of grimy way that they did in the last film. So here's some examples. Near the beginning of the film, one character, male orderly, is killed in the mental hospital, and Victoria, who is Art's sidekick in the film, is there. One of them's pulling bits of his face off, and then Art's decapitated body from the previous film's pulling another part of his face off. And you would have thought that having done all this with practical effects, they would give you a long shot, the face coming apart and blood coming out everywhere. But as soon as it gets underway, they just sort of cut away. And this happens a number of times in the film. Like there's a construction worker, I think it is, whose his head gets degloved. At one point, Art the Clown has a weapon, and he pulls the skin off the guy's head, and then there's like a screaming skull, and it immediately cuts away. There's other parts where people get killed sort of off camera. So there's Clint Howard's character and someone else in a bar. They get shot, and you just see like blood spray. You don't see them getting shot. Jonathan, Sienna's brother, again spoilers, he dies off camera. So does Sienna's uncle die off camera. So you've got deaths entirely off camera. You've got the camera cutting away from violence. I think maybe they were going for a snappier, sort of sprightlier editing style to make it look more professional. But if that was the case, then why were some of the dramatic non-violent scenes edited in such a baggy way? Like as with Damien Leone's other, I think he must have done the editing for this. With the other Terrifier films, the editing is a bit of an issue, but some parts that are rough around the edges can add to the charm of a slasher film with other elements in place. So it isn't necessarily a problem in itself, but for this film, it felt weird to cut away from the violence so quickly and so readily, but to linger on other things that aren't really what we come to the Terrifier films for. So there was that. And another issue I had was, okay, so in the second film, we had the little pale girl who was the entity responsible for resurrecting Art at the end of the second film. This time, the entity, which is acting like his familiar or sidekick, is Victoria Hayes, who is the ill-fated final girl from the first film. She's sort of a bit like a zombie in this because I do believe she deletes herself in one scene of the film, but her body is still being moved around by the entity. It's fine. As with a lot of Terrifier, the point isn't hammered home. You sometimes you have to infer things a little bit for yourself, but that's fine, I suppose. She so she and Art go around now. I've got a couple of issues here. First one is yes, Victoria. She talks far too much in the climax of the film, just chatting away all the time. Lots of taunts, not really that much that adds to the story compared to the number of taunts that are in there. So that's all very grating after a while. And Art the Clown becomes a second fiddle in the end of the film, which we watch these films for Art the Clown, not really for his sidekick. But my other problem with villains in this film is Art himself. Now, this is one of my major complaints, is I felt that he was too goofy in this film. There was just too many reactions. It was too fussy. It was too busy. It's like they shot tons and tons of reaction shots of David Howard Thornton seeing different things as Art the Clown, and they had to put they wanted to use all of them. Maybe, I don't know. Like there's a scene where he's going to freeze Santa with a fire extinguisher, or so it's liquid nitrogen, I think, that he's fitted into a fire extinguisher or something. So it's a fire extinguisher that will freeze people, and he shows the fire extinguisher, and then he shows it again, and he's taunting him, and he's got this very sort of camp, over the top look on his face, like I'm gonna get you. In the first film, he was way more dour and grimy, and there were moments where he would do something a bit camp and silly, but it was over quite quickly, and it was just enough. And the second film as well, I mean, he's a bit more over the top in the second one, but there's a I'm not sure how to describe it. He seems like more of an adult somehow in the other two films. In this film, he seems more like a misbehaving child who's showing off, and it's quite annoying. In the shower scene, where if you've seen it, you'll know that he kills a couple who are making out in the shower. He's got a chainsaw and he kills them. And there's a bit where he cuts a guy's leg off, and he picks the leg up and smells the foot, and makes a face and throws the foot away, and stuff like that. You know, when he is overhearing people talking about himself, and some girls saying, you know, I wonder what he smells like or something, and Art the Clown smells his own armpit and stuff like that. Each one of these things isn't necessarily a bad thing, but there's so many of them that it's like he's become an annoying caricature of himself. It's just overacted, and I found that it wasn't scary. I don't really think that we're necessarily frightened by the horror films that we watch most of the time, but we do feel that some characters are creepy or intimidating, and Art the Clown was definitely intimidating in the first two of these films. In the third one, I didn't feel very intimidated by him, and I didn't feel worried or scared about how far he might go. It became quite clear by the second half of the film that they weren't really pushing it in the same way as the second one. Like I said, in the second film, they would linger on acts of violence. You didn't know how long you were going to have to tolerate it being in frame, and it was unpleasant, and there was a sort of demented, chaotic, I don't want to say it's like an edgelord film, but it's a bit edgy maybe, but there was something unrestrained about it. Like no studio had been involved. You didn't know how far they were going to go, and of course no studio was involved in the third one, so they could have done what they wanted really. But it felt like they were holding back a little bit in the third one, or the way it was edited just didn't seem like it was going to go over the edge in some way that made you really uncomfortable. So that's another thing. Again, I mean, the violence isn't bad. It looks great. The practical effects look great. That's fine, and there's some good kills in there and everything by slasher film standards. It's just that it's sort of middling for a Terrifier film, and it's sort of middling over the whole film. Just sort of feels middling to me. I can't really describe it. There's the music. The second film has great music. If you go onto YouTube and you look up the soundtrack, there's tons of these great 80s sounding synthwave songs. There's something very magical about when the second film begins and you can just see Sienna making her cosplay outfit, and that song by The Midnight starts up. There's almost like a grand atmosphere to it. It's like a big ambitious project, and it feels like quite emotional almost. And with the third one, there wasn't a big atmosphere with the music. There was some serviceable slasher score elements and that. It wasn't bad. It was still good, but it did not feel as exciting, I suppose, as the second one. Some of the negativity of this review might come from the fact that I had extremely high expectations. Perhaps if I'd seen Terrifier 3 first, I don't know why you would do that, but if I'd seen Terrifier 3 first, then perhaps I would have been blown away by it. So that leads me on to the last thing, which isn't this. It's not a complaint. Again, it's just another thing that's really middling is the lore. I sometimes feel that these films don't make things clear enough, and you have to infer it or go and read theories somewhere. I would like the Terrifier films to start answering questions clearly and define the rules of their own universe clearly. So without going deep into lore or anything, here's one example. At the end of Terrifier 3, it does seem that using the magical sword, when she pierces Art the Clown, Sienna, a lot of people have said this, that his powers have been removed. So he's now immortal and can be killed. And when you see the film, that might well be the case, because he has that look on his face. It looks like something's being removed from him, and then he seems very depressed at the end of the film when he's waiting at the bus stop and he gets on the bus. If that's the case, then that's good. That's a good plot point. It's very interesting if he could be killed outright in Terrifier 4 by a human being, and now he's mortal like a human being. That's very interesting. However, the film doesn't really make it clear that that's the case. You're left to sort of guess. Maybe it will be made clear at the beginning of the fourth film. But there's lots of stuff like that. There's stuff that's not really necessarily unclear. It's just that we haven't got an answer yet. I feel like we should have had an answer by now. So we've now had two films that are hinting that there's some sort of connection between Sienna's father and Art the Clown. There is a connection. The films have made it very clear there's a connection. But I would like to know specifically what. And I don't think the time was Terrifier 4. I think the time was Terrifier 3, because these films are 2 years apart. So you're going to be waiting 4 years between Terrifiers 2 and 4. And whatever the reveal is, I mean, it have to be amazing to be worth the wait at this point. But whatever the reveal is, I think we should have got that by now. We should have had not necessarily answers to where Art is from, but maybe some hints here and there, as to just very small hints as to who he was when he was a human, perhaps just what his profession was or where he grew up, or perhaps there was an event in his past that made him disturbed or something. We don't need to see a picture of his face when he was a person. We don't need to have a flashback of him. But perhaps it could be something along the lines of he visits his childhood home and stands outside it, or we see some item in his possession or something that hints as to his past life. So there was another thing I wanted to mention that I was quite disappointed about, and this is just something I wanted to happen that didn't happen, was that at the beginning when he was resurrected, when Art came back to life, what I really wanted to happen was I wanted Victoria Hayes to kill everyone in the mental hospital and rebuild his body out of the parts of the slaughtered mental patients, because to have a magical clown made out of all of the dismembered body parts of mental patients would have been cool, and it could have upped the body count at the beginning. But instead of that, we got I think she was eating someone's body. She was eating the female orderly from the second film's body, and there was some sort of feeding tube going from her into Art or something, or Art was eating the female orderly's body, and then Art's decapitated body from the second film came back and the head got reunited with it. That was sort of cool in its own right, but I was expecting some giant massacre, but that's not necessarily to take anything away from the film. That's just what I was expecting and I would have liked to have seen, but that's not what happened. So anyway, what would I give this film? I think it's quite well acted, although I found Art the Clown too goofy. I think the sound was good, although the second film had a better soundtrack. I think the structure of the film was fine, but minus a bit of positivity for just dragging on too long and getting repetitive, just cutting back and forward between Art and Sienna. The story, we understand a little bit more about how the world works, but not very much, so that's sort of middling as well. The violence, like I described, it's quite middling. I'm going to have to give it a 5, unfortunately. I was really looking forward to this, and I think it's the worst Terrifier film. I really like the second one a lot, so I'll do a separate review of that. But unfortunately for me, this one's a 5 out of 10. Anyway, so that's my review of Terrifier 3. If you've watched this far, thank you very much.